Hi everyone, welcome back to Get Bookish. Bex here today to talk about some of my BookTube prize reading. So in this clip, I'm just going to be talking about the first 3 books that I've completed, and then I will talk about the other ones and tack them onto this later. But I am participating again this year. I took last year off, but now I have decided to read for the nonfiction group for the Octofinals, and I was assigned Section A. If you're not familiar with the BookTube prize, I will link the YouTube channel down below as well as the website. There is a fiction and nonfiction division, and I've read for both before, but I generally prefer to read for the nonfiction, so that's why I chose it for this year. So let's talk about the first book that I finished, and that is A Truce That Is Not Peace by Miriam Toews. When I saw this book pop up in my group, I was excited because I have read Miriam Toews before. She's a Canadian author, so that was exciting to me. And from what I understood of this book was that it was a memoir and it was going to be reflecting on the death of her sister. And I thought that was certainly something that I would find interesting to read about. It was a short book. I just read it as an ebook from my library. So yeah, shout out to my library for having some of these books and me being able to easily access them. And this has also gotten a fair amount of hype. Like if you look on the Goodreads page, it's got a ton of like long listed for this, a finalist for this, et cetera, et cetera. And it also said she tells her own story for the first time. And like she does, but she doesn't, because it's not an autobiography, it's a memoir, and so it is focusing on particular things, and she's also doing it in not the sort of standard memoir way. That I was not prepared for. This has a bit of an atypical structure. It's a bit more abstract. The way she writes, sometimes it really feels like it's very stream of consciousness in her head, and I was having difficulty following what exactly she was getting at points. I was wondering why I needed to read this. However, there were points where she was telling a story that I was able to follow. Either it was a memory from when she was younger, a story with her sister or her father, mother, kids, grandkids. Like there were times where I was learning things about her, and she seems like she's had an interesting life, but I was frustrated because there were a lot of moments where I felt like I was getting into a particular story and then she would sort of sidestep and start talking about something else. Like it'd be like a snippet, then another snippet, then another snippet, and they may or may not be related to each other. So that explains kind of why the book is a little bit smaller, because she's just doing it in a very different way. And the book kicks off with her trying to respond to this writing prompt that she's been given for a literary event. The prompt is, "Why do you write?" And she just can't answer that question in a straightforward way. She has to do it in a very abstract-y, roundabout way. And that leads her to some of her things that she muses on that I found difficult to follow. I think some people could really enjoy this book if you're more prepared for what you're getting into. For me though, unfortunately, it wasn't quite what I wanted. It could be really moving at times. I mean, she is reflecting on the death of her father and her sister, but yeah, just not the structure that I was looking for. So this one I gave a 2.5 out of 5, and even though I haven't finished reading all 6 books that I've been assigned, I would be surprised if any of them were below this book, just based on what the other ones are about. The second book that I finished is Not My Type, One Woman versus a President by E. Jean Carroll. And this one I listened to on audio. And I specifically mention that because if you are at all interested in this book, you should listen to the audio book, because E. Jean Carroll reads it and you get to experience her story with her. She is not a professional narrator, but she is a professional writer, and she's reading what she wrote, and so she is able to add the correct emphasis and emotion behind certain moments, to the point where sometimes you can hear her kind of stifling a laugh, or you can hear her getting choked up. It was absolutely worth it in my mind to do the audiobook just for that experience. This is a tough listen though, not because it's poorly written or because the narration is bad, but because of what the book is focused on. So E. Jean Carroll is telling you a bit about her life, but it's really focusing on the trial that she had to go through. She sued Trump twice, as in President Trump. Yeah, that one. Because he sexually assaulted her in the 90s and then was like defaming her, her name. And she is somebody that has made a name for herself through the years through her writing and being a presence, on television and online and in magazines. And so she was able to come after him for making her seem like she was overreacting to things. You get the very nitty-gritty of the trial because she's telling you about the lead up to it, all the prep that she had to do, and actually sitting there and having to tell her story of what happened to her and having to listen to other people overanalyze it and tell her all the reasons, why this didn't actually happen. And so in that way, it is a very, very tough listen. There were points where I was just kind of sitting there just grimacing because it was hard to take in. That being said, it can be very moving, and it's actually quite funny. There were a number of times that I chuckled out loud because of how she was speaking. She has such an interesting way of describing the world around her, and E. Jean Carroll is in her early 80s. So she's lived a whole life, and she has had a lot of different things happen to her, good and bad, and so she's able to integrate all that into her book. I did find it repetitive at times. She's a big fashion person. She loves talking about clothing and talking about what she's wearing, what other people are wearing. It's clearly important to her, not as important to me, and so sometimes she would talk about these little telling you like the designer of the jacket, the dress, the shoes, all that. I didn't really care that much, but I guess it could sort of paint a picture for you. And there was one point where she was describing all the bags that she had packed because she was going to go away for a while to do prep for a trial. And so she described what was in each of her suitcases, and I was like, girl, I get this is your book and you can do what you want, but like that was way too much detail for me. So that was one point where it was too much. But that wasn't the overarching point of the book. There were many other things going on, many more serious, intense, funny, heartwarming, tragic things being talked about. And so although the fashion stuff did come up, it wasn't always like grinding my gears or anything. So if you are able to handle reading a book like this, I never would have picked it up on my own. This is not the kind of book that I would have just been like, oh yeah, I want to read that. It's, talking about a person that the less I hear about him, the better kind of thing. But because this was handed to me as something that I needed to read, I put in the time, and I am glad I listened to it. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5. The third book that I finished so far is The Place of Tides by James Rebanks, and I just have to say right off the bat that this has a stunning cover. I loved staring at it when I was in the process of reading this book. This book is told from the author's perspective as he joins 2 women on a remote Norwegian island as they care for the eider ducks that are coming in off the ocean to lay their eggs. Eider ducks and duck women have been part of Norwegian history for quite some time, but it was all new to me. These women go and they set up all these various nests on a particular island or islands that they might be caring for, and then when the ducks come in, they collect their down that they then can sell, and they have to clean the down and everything like that, and then they also kind of protect the eider ducks from things that might try to eat their young or hurt them. So it's a bit of this symbiotic relationship that has been created over many, many years, but obviously the tradition is fading. This book is very relaxing. It is slow-paced because the life of living on this island is also slow-paced. They're living in kind of what we would think of as a cabin. They only have electricity when they run the generator. They have to use an outhouse, but you are absolutely surrounded by this gorgeous nature and also these ferocious storms. And the way the author was describing all of this, I could picture it so clearly in my mind. And I feel like the cover of this also kind of helps you picture what it would be like. And I just really enjoyed getting a glimpse into this very specific thing that I knew nothing about. You do get some history and culture of living on these more remote islands of Norway. This book just put me in a really calm, reflective mood, and I think I appreciated that, just considering the chaos of everything that is happening in the world all the time now. I liked being able to listen to this. I was actually listening to this and coloring in a coloring book, which I have not done that in a long time, but it just put me in the headspace to want to sit there and do that rather than listen to it while I was cleaning or out on a walk or something like that, which is when I typically am listening to audiobooks. And so, yeah, it made me want to slow down and sort of take it in. When I read what this book was about, I thought, okay, yeah, that'll be interesting, but it just affected me in a way that I wasn't expecting, and it was a positive way. So yeah, I really enjoyed my time with this one, and I have already recommended it to other people to check out. So yeah, I gave this one a 4 out of 5 as well. That wraps up the first 3 books that I've read so far, so I will pass it on to future me to talk about the last 3. All right, seconds for you, but weeks for me. I have my thoughts on the remaining 3 books as well as my official ranking. So the 4th book that I finished was one that I absolutely have to read off of my notes because it's a long one. Tigers Between Empires, The Improbable Return of Great Cats to the Forests of Russia and China, and this was written by Jonathan C. Slatt. Now, originally, when I found out I was going to have to read this book, I was a bit nervous because I kind of don't love nature books. I've had to read sort of like general nature books before, or stuff that's about like birds and stuff, and I just don't find myself caring that much. I generally prefer nonfiction that's focused on human beings and history and that sort of angle. However, this one surprised me because not only did we get to know the people involved, but we also got to know the tigers. So I cared about the animals equally, if no, more than I cared about the people. The subtitle of this is pretty thorough, so you already have a general idea of what this is about, but we get to see the social and political, economic effects of what's going on in Eastern Russia soon after the fall of the Soviet Union. And the people that were following this team is both Russian and American, and kind of the coming together of those two cultures after such a long time of being told that they're not supposed to interact. But then, so we have those relationships between the people, but then you have the relationships with the people and the tigers. And we got to learn about so many different tigers. I learned a lot about them too. I mean, I always have appreciated them. I think they're beautiful and majestic creatures. I love cats, and they're part of the same family. They're distantly related. So I'm a cat person. And so getting to learn the names of these tigers and learn what they did on a day-to-day basis, them raising their young, or sort of the journey that they would go on, and what it was like trying to trap the tigers so that they could put tracking devices on them so they could learn more about them. Like, so much of what we know about tigers, we didn't know at the point that this book was taking place. There's a certain wonder about learning about these creatures because they're so powerful, so big, and a lot of the troubles that they face, a lot of the challenges with the kind of habitat that they need to live in. And they talk about some of the bad sides of things, like attacking livestock and very rarely attacking people. If you are a lover of animal books, this is absolutely something you have to read. And even if you're more like me and you don't generally tend to go for nature books, I would say give this one a try. It was also emotional because you do follow the lives of these tigers, and a lot of times, it says it in the book, but a lot of times with big predators like this, like top of the food chain, the way their lives end is not typically very peaceful. So that was also hard to read about sometimes, whether it was natural or not. So yes, all of the emotions were actually felt with this book, and I was really pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. So this is like a strong 4 out of 5. 5th, I finished There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America by Brian Goldstone. This is another book on this list that I was aware of beforehand. I knew it existed, but I didn't really know much about what it was actually following. What this does do is follow a number of families that through various circumstances are all experiencing homelessness around the same time. And it's not homelessness in the way that we might traditionally think, not that all of these families are staying in shelters or not that they're on the streets, but that they might be crashing at other people's houses, they might be living in their cars, they might be staying at like long-term extended stay motels. And so there is all of this intricacy that we're looking at that brings up a lot of these rules and regulations about how you help people that are experiencing homelessness. All of these people live in Atlanta, Georgia, and the author is an anthropologist, so he was actually with them for a lot of the things that we're reading about in the book. Like, he was physically there, and he talks about it at the end of the book of sort of that line that of what he was allowing himself to do versus not, how he was helping and how he wasn't allowing himself to help, and then what he was able to do after he finished writing his book. But oh man, this book is incredibly depressing. To learn what these people are going through, it was so stressful for me as somebody who was not living their lives, somebody who has a place that I rent and has a bed to sleep in every night and has a steady income. Oh my God, it was so stressful to read this book to the point where I didn't want to pick it up because the world is very hard right now, and so I didn't want to read a book about people who are experiencing something that is like really close to home in a lot of ways, because this homelessness is something that exists everywhere, and a few different things can happen and suddenly you're in their shoes as well, and it's just like, it stressed me out. And also reading about Georgia specifically, like the state of Georgia, their rental laws are shit. So it was frustrating for me as somebody that lives in Ontario, knowing what I have as a renter, like the rules. I mean, things happen, but there are more rules here. It made me mad, on top of all of the other things that these people are dealing with. And I think every family that we followed had children, and that adds to the complication of the situation. That was stressing me out even more, because these poor kids and what they're having to go through. So yeah, the flow of the writing was fantastic. Like, once I actually picked up the book and started reading it, I had no problem going through it. I did want to learn more, but I also just didn't, I wanted that little bit of hope. It was so depressing. And there would be one good moment, and they would hint, like the author would hint at something. I'm like, oh no, it's all gonna fall apart. Like, enjoy it for like the 2 months that they have their shit together, and then it's all gonna fall apart again. And oh my gosh, it was just one bad thing after another. And so this book is so well done, but you really have to be in the right headspace to be able to read it, because it is going to take a lot out of you. So this book is also a 4 out of 5, but it is really, really good. But my reading experience was just a tough one. The final book that I finished for this round of the BookTube prize is King of Kings. Get ready for another long subtitle. The Iranian Revolution, a Story of Hubris, Delusion, and Catastrophic Miscalculation by Scott Anderson. So this book, when I was originally assigned it on February 1st, was not as incredibly relevant as it now is at the end of March. So yeah, for all the wrong reasons, really. So that was interesting to know that I'm going to have to pick up this book and seeing what's happening in the world right now. This book is big. I did get the physical copy from my library at first, and then I had to switch to the audiobook because I needed to return it, because what do you know, there was a decent amount of holds on the book. So when I switched to the audiobook is almost 18 hours long, so that gives me an idea of how thick the book itself was. And I knew it was going to be a bit of a challenge to get through, because I figured there was going to be names and like a lot of history that I didn't totally understand, and so some of it's probably like in one ear out the other, but I tried my best. So this really documents the cast of characters in Iran, and also a lot of people in the US in that relationship with America. So there's a lot of intricacies there. And then you're also looking at the political, the social, economic, and religious, because religion is very important in Iran and affects a lot of things. And so you're looking at all of these factors and how all of these things combined to cause this revolution to happen. There is this huge picture that has to be painted so you can understand how this one thing would cause this thing would cause this thing, or why an event, 30 years ago would cause this, or an event, hundreds of years ago might affect something. So everything is so interconnected in a way that is impossible to like easily re-explain to anyone else. If someone asked me, well, how did the Iranian Revolution happen? I wouldn't really be able to summarize it properly to them, despite having made my way through such a large book. As I already mentioned, there's a lot of names, it's very detailed, but there were points where I was very engaged with it. I found it a lot easier to get through it when I was listening to the audiobook, rather than when I was trying to physically read it with my eyeballs at the end of a workday. It made it a bit easier to absorb all of the information, because there were times where it did feel like sloggy. I felt like I was slogging through the book at points, but there were sub-stories in this big story that I was very interested in. So there would be points where I felt like I was really flying through it, and I would be trying to find things to do so that I could continue listening. But yeah, there were also times where it just felt like it was a lot of names, a lot of people talking to each other, a lot of flawed people talking to each other. It's still a good book once it's not badly written or anything like that. It's just the topic itself is a lot to get through. The book itself is very big. So this one I'd probably give it, it's more like a 3.75 out of 5. 3 is way too harsh. Like I wouldn't go lower than a 3.5, but I can't quite put it at the same level as the other books, as a lot of the other books that I read for this. Now that I've shared my thoughts on all 6 books, it's time for me to share my official rankings. So this is what I have submitted to the BookTube prize. I am filming this before the results are released, so I'll be very interested to see which books end up where in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to start at number 6, which is the worst book of the bunch. It probably won't come as a surprise to you, but my least favorite was A Truce That Is Not Peace. I just didn't really jive with this book. Had moments where it was interesting and it worked for me, but this was very easily the lowest book on the list. I didn't have to debate that at all. This book certainly has its audience. It's just a little too abstract and not really experimental, but it's just a little too weird for me. I was expecting something a little more standard as far as a memoir goes. Number 5 also probably won't be particularly surprising, but King of Kings, I put at number 5 because it is still a good book, but it just wasn't the best of the best for me, and it was a bit challenging to get through at times. Numbers 4 through 1 were very difficult for me to figure out where they were going to fall in the rankings, because there were things that I liked about every book a lot, and so it came down to like these nitty-gritty personal feelings to dictate how the last 4 ranked. So in number 4, I decided to put There Is No Place for Us. I feel like this book could easily make top 3 and move on, but for me and my experience with the other books in this top 4, this one, it was just so depressing. As I've already said, it was incredibly hard to get through at times, and although it is very, very well written, like the fact that it is number 4 on this list, it's really just because I was trying to think like, okay, well, I didn't really always want to pick this book up, and we don't, there's no good resolution at the end because these things are still happening, and so therefore it's got to end up being number 4, which it feels so stupid because this is definitely a book I would recommend to people, but unfortunately just the way the rankings worked out, it didn't quite make it into top 3. If it does move on, totally fine with that though. In the number 3 spot, I put Not My Type, and I think this one, I was just pleasantly surprised by how entertaining it was to listen to. Maybe if I read the physical book, it would have ended up being number 4, and I would have flipped 3 and 4, but because I listened to the audiobook and I got to hear the author tell her story and hear her emotions and hear her reading her humorous writing, like she has such a unique writing voice, so perhaps if I had read it physically, I would have got a lot of that as well. But I had such a good time with this book, and it's one of those things I never would have picked up. And so being able to read it for this and realizing like, oh, this book is actually really good, that was a pleasant thing to experience. And I think also having this story be told from somebody who is in her 80s is really cool, because I feel like we don't get those kinds of stories as much. There was a lot of debate between 3 and 4. There was a lot of debate between 1 and 2. I could have flipped the books around, but I ended up putting Tigers Between Empires as number 2. I was really pleasantly surprised by how much I ended up enjoying this, and the attachment that I felt to the tigers and the emotion that I felt for them and wanting to know how they were doing, wanting to hear their stories, understanding all of the conservation work that was going on there, and even just the lives of Russians in the eastern part of the country at that time, and having those Americans come in and those differences. And yeah, I was really surprised by how much this book appealed to me, and it's really down to getting to hear about all those tigers. Number 1, I think, is a bit of a surprise overall. I don't know how many other people would put this book as their number 1, because it is so subdued and quiet, and that is The Place of Tides. I just felt such a calmness reading this book, and maybe that's what I needed right now. This, like I said, this book made me slow down, made me want to color in my coloring book, made me just want to sit there and picture what he was describing. I want to give this book its due, and so I am putting it in the number 1 spot here. If it doesn't move on, I wouldn't be totally shocked. I think this was just, in this case, perhaps the right book at the right time for me. I would recommend many of these books to people, but this one just had that little extra specialness to it that I wasn't expecting and I really needed in the moment. So it gets to be number 1. If you read for the BookTube prize, fiction or nonfiction, in the Octofinals, let me know how that went for you down in the comments below. And if you happen to actually be reading for my group, I would love to know how you ranked things, and I'm very curious to see what moves on. As always, there's some links in the down bar that you can check out if you feel so inclined. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you later.